All right, welcome everyone to the AIA East Bay 2024 lecture series. This is the third event, middle of our lecture series this year. Another great lineup. My name is Brian Stryzik. I'm an architect at Kennelly Architecture and Planning in San Francisco, and also was the AIA East Bay board president in 2022. One of my goals as a board president was to start this lecture series, and last year we launched it. And we really highlighted the legacy of the East Bay. So really trying to promote architects and designers and buildings in the East Bay. And it was a very fun event. Actually, I don't see anyone here that was on it, but it was a really wonderful time. And please look at the AIA East Bay website if you want to see any of those. This year, instead of doing the legacy, we're looking at these relationships between owners and architects, or owners and designers. And we really thought that that'd be interesting to get the perspective of the owner in these conversations, because there's so many times when architects talk about buildings, the client never really is integral to that conversation. So having them at the table, talking with their clients, with their architects that they hired, we thought that'd be really dynamic. And I think based on our prep call, it will be again this time. So tonight. Great. We have two projects we're going to be highlighting. So the first team will be architect Anne Fougeron with Michael Simons from the Kapor Center. He was the construction manager, building rep, all those things. So Anne Fougeron, she's FAIA, was the highest honor in the AIA. So congratulations on that. She started her practice, Fougeron Architecture, in the 80s. And continues to win awards. And in 2022, you won the Maybach Prize for achievements in great design. So congratulations on that. Your scope of work goes from single family to commercial to multifamily to civic. Really wide range for her practice, and it's exciting to see how she really challenges architecture and design in all those projects. She's also been involved in the Monterey Design Conference board, trying to organize that conference. It's coming up this October, so if you haven't been there, please sign up now. It's a wonderful time. Michael Simons, you were as we said, building manager project, owner's rep for this project. You work a lot on affordable housing and community projects. You're with your company, MSPDI, something like that. What's that stand for? Development. Okay. Wonderful. And you have a passion for building design and programming, which sounds like a great one to be as a rep. The next team is going to be Walter Hood as a landscape architect for the Oakland Museum. And Walter Hood started Hood Design, landscape design, Hood Design. Okay. In here over in Oakland, he's a unique practice because he's an architect, he's a landscape architect, he's an artist, he's an educator, he's a public service director, community organizer. So a very unique practice that really touches a lot of different aspects of design. And wonderful projects throughout the Bay Area and international and the United States. I have two kids, and so many of our family photos have been in front of your project. So like up at Cornerstone, DeYoung, Oakland Museum at Friday nights. So it's really great to finally get you here and be able to hear from you about your projects. Last person is Laura Forgety. So close, not quite right. But you're the CEO of the Oakland Museum of California. I think your roles are administration and program organization, but you also really led the team for the redevelopment of the Kevin Roach design building. So sounds like an ambitious thing. The Oakland Museum of California is such an integral part of Oakland, being right at the heart of Oakland, but further also the Bay Area, where you highlight art, science, and natural history. So it's a pretty interesting thing to bring all that together into one building. And finally, the building's opened up to the heart of the city, Lake Merritt. So I'm very excited to see that. As you can see in the picture, long overdue, kind of breaking down that brutalist fence. Tonight's moderator is Scott Salge. He's a principal at Nolan Tam. Nolan Tam have really, as a firm culture and for projects, have really been interested in diversity and social equity. And so I think that's a perfect fit for this social benefit topic. Sounds like you came in architect because you were interested in art and also wanted to blend this to education and engineering. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm hopefully you are equally excited about moderating this panel. So I'm
100% motivated to moderate.
So I'm going to hand it over to Scott to moderate and tell you what's going on. And please help welcome me to our guests.
Brian, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Scott Salge, Nolan Tam Architects. I really am glad to be here. We had a really great sort of session talking with the panel here about the spirit of these projects and what the discussion might be. I think that, Brian, this is a great idea to pair clients and architects and designers to talk about developing projects and the trials and tribulations, the strength of design, the power of the experience of these projects for these communities. And I think it's a really interesting perspective to hear both sides. So I challenge the panel. I didn't see the other one, but I would challenge the panel to like make sure that the clients like, you know, express express their experience for these projects. I think we jump in and I think we'll present the two projects. And then in the order they're on the screen, and then we'll have some sort of leading questions, and then we're going to open it up to everyone else. I think that's the overall structure. Brian, anything else that we think you want to include? Awesome. All right. So Michael and Anne, do you want to kick off?
Okay. Michael is going to start.
So I'll give a little background of the Kapor Center. So the Kapor Center was, I think we developed it in 2012, was it? Around 2010, 2012. And the Kapors, Mitch and Frida Kapor, they're very well known. Mitch Kapor invented Lotus 123, which was the in the 80s, which was a sort of predecessor for Excel, and so he really changed, you know, financial modeling and so forth, and then went on to start to do venture capital investing, seed investing. He's sort of an early investor. He, you know, Uber, there's so many household names that he was involved in. And his wife, Frida, they're kind of a really fascinating couple. She is, you know, early in sort of, which is now, we hear it a lot, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She was actually early in sort of women's sort of, in kind of early in the 70s with abuse, and so she started her firm. She then worked with Mitch at Lotus 123, and then they've started a number of really amazing programs, mostly focused on Black and brown people, kind of diversifying tech, but also, you know, early education, STEM. They have a group called Level Playing Field, SMASH, I can't remember, something Brotherhood, and where they get young men into colleges. And so they've sort of come together, and their big thing is kind of diversifying tech. So they've been doing that for about 10 or 20 years. And they're just fascinating. I mean, I remember when we worked for them that, you know, they don't invest in like, you know, an app to remind you to feed your dog, you know, like they, you know, when we were there, they were working on one that allowed communication from families in people who are incarcerated, because it's so expensive for them to make calls to reach their families that in order to keep that community, they found a way to do it through technology. Or they had another one where they had, it was someone who invested in what was it? Sending money back to families. There was always sending money to foreign countries. The fees are very high. They found a way to do it with very low fees. So they were really trying, even in their investing, to make a social impact. I worked on another project called College Track with Lorene Jobs. It's a group that she's doing for getting kids into college. Through her contact, I was introduced to the Kapors to work on this project. So I'm going to let Anne talk a little bit more about the design.
So we were brought in, it was a competition. I don't remember who the other people who were competing.
I do,
But whatever, they didn't win. We did. And so the big thing is we were really interested. I mean, I've done a lot of work on sort of ideas of social justice. I've done a lot of work for Planned Parenthood. I've done a lot of work on affordable housing. And for us, we're always really interested in kind of this mission-driven architecture and how you take ideas that are intrinsic to the organization and then you kind of reflect them in the design and you make the design better for it. So we won the competition because we presented to them this idea of this building where we would sort of kind of have, and this is just the outside of the building done. It was a complicated historical building that had already been intervened on and then abandoned. So there was kind of relics on the inside. It was almost like it had two, the outside and then the inside with like these concrete shafts that were already in place and these different ways, these seismic braces that were not always in the right place. So it was very complicated to make it all work. But anyway, the idea that we wanted was to talk about these two major interventions. So there was the existing building with its very fun sort of geometry. And then they really wanted to do something on the top floor that would become this kind of outdoor space, but also this place where everybody in the building could meet. So because they have all these different organizations, right? And where do they all come together? So there's this very nice sort of food area and this outdoor space, which actually Walter designed with us. You remember that, Walter? Yeah. And then we wanted to do this vertical intervention because we thought the thing that was really important was to get this connection between all these different organizations, but also because the vertical connection talks about, kind of breaking through glass ceilings and sort of having this kind of power for different people to meet in different ways. So that was the insertion of this kind of circular stair. With this building, it was very easy to go a little crazy with circles, which we kind of did. But and then this was this idea of how the vertical and the horizontal come together. So we did this kind of presentation for them, and we talked a lot about this idea of all these different architectural gestures really being about understanding what we thought was their kind of program and what they needed, and that worked. The program evolved a lot as we were working on it. It was complicated, but we got through it. So that was like one of the things that we did actually for the competition, is to sort of put this idea of how these different things work. There's 4 floors, because there's also a basement floor that we made into a kind of 2-story auditorium. So you can see it from the street, and then you kind of go up the circular stair, and then you go up to the sort of different levels to see all of that. So anyway, a lot of different materials. Frida and Mitch were very involved in every single design decision. So it was not one of those things where we had a lot of meetings with staff. It was more that we had a lot of meetings with Frida and Mitch, who were like, kind of going back to staff and discussing how they want to organize things and then getting back to us. So, which was, probably better in a way. It had its moments for everyone in different ways, so that's fine. But so and Frida particularly has a very visual sense and a lot of ideas about how she thinks things should look and be. So she definitely sat in with us and helped us with all the selection. So this is that perch on the outside, and you can see the kind of, that's that big space that was added. That's completely new, and the kind of art, the geometry, the architecture of it, the whole thing is about kind of creating this outdoor space and this very welcoming place for everybody in the building. So that's the lobby. That's what we talked about, the idea of these vertical shafts that come through, and also things like this transparency on top here, which, sort of seemed important because we wanted everybody in the building to be able to look down into the lobby. So there's always these different moments in the building that kind of bring you together and sort of remind you of why you're there. Big stair that takes you down to the meeting auditorium space that's in the basement, that we tried to not make it look like a basement. And then, nice stairs that sort of wrap around. A lot of kind of pretty exotic materials. That's one thing, working for a client who, in the end, could fund this themselves. It meant that we could really use some pretty nice materials, and they really thought of this place as something that they're going to do once and never do again. So it was important to them that it had a certain quality. Anyway, and then you go upstairs. And then this is the outdoor space. This is, oh, Walter, we don't have a photograph, but it looks better. Sorry. But Walter and I we really worked together. It was great. It was really fun. It's a small space. It's not huge, but it was really important that the kind of architecture and the landscape sort of work together. So, and it's really well used. There you go. So that's the last one for us. It's 10 minutes. So
Yeah, you
fine.
did.
Yeah.
And that was impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Kudos. We'll pass it to Walter, Lori. Thank you.
right.
Yeah.
Well, something completely different.
Yeah.
Press that there.
Do you want me to press it here?
Yeah.
Or do you want it to, you want to move this?
Oh, I get it. Yeah, sorry. And, no, because he's got some wire.
Do you want to just change places? Or do you want me to do it?
This isn't working, all right? The arrows?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can also. There we go.
There, you try it.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay, we could do it by hand.
Okay.
So Lori Fogarty, I'm the director of the Oakland Museum of California, and I did not have sole decision-making authority in this project. Let me say that right off the bat. Walter and I have known each other for a long time. We actually worked on an exhibition project when I was at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I've been at the Oakland Museum since 2006. And early on, he and I had a conversation about reimagining these gardens that were designed by Dan Kiley. But at that moment, we were actually underway with a renovation project that we worked on with Mark Cavagnero that was really focused on the building and the galleries. The gardens were not part of that scope, but they were still a glimmer in our eye. And there were a couple things that I say were the true inspirations for this project. Here's one of them. This was the 2015 Warriors NBA celebration at Lake Merritt. And as you can see, there were a lot of people. As you can't see, the Oakland Museum of California, which was behind all of those trees. And I stood out there on one of those terraces and said, there are 1 million people around Lake Merritt and they have no idea that the museum is here. And the other was Friday nights at OMCA, which was a wonderful initiative we started in 2013. Really, the heart of it was at our 10th Street side in our amphitheater. And again, we were getting, at the pre-COVID, at the height of Friday nights, we would get 3,000 or 4,000 people a night at the museum, and they had started to extend into the gardens. But here they are on the 10th Street side, again, where the museum just looks almost like it's the back of a parking garage here. So these were the inspirations. How do we throw our doors open to the public? And Walter and I started talking about this project as a town square.
And from there, Lori,
I think you could
we talked a lot, but I didn't get hired. And we did an installation actually for that opening. And that's when you changed the entryway around the corner to be on, was it on Oak Street? And that was part of that work. So when we first started, I asked Lori, I said, we didn't start on the physical design. We actually started on a master plan. That we're working with the board to raise money. And so I asked her, could we develop this process to rethink it? And we broke it up into the city and the museum and the gardens, the museum and infrastructure, and then site curation, just as a way to kind of think through some of the things that they were thinking about. And once we did that, we made a 10 by 10 model in my office studio. And then we invited them in to come and think about planning. And what we tried to do was show them that they were not only connected to the lake, but they were connected to downtown. And that's something that people never think about in that quadrant. And so as we started thinking about it, then we just said, let's then go out and see what are the things around us that we can have a relationship with, from urban spaces to gardens. And then we said, okay, let's curate what you have. And I think one of the big epiphanies were, I always thought Oakland Museum was a sculpture garden. And Lori's like, we're not a sculpture garden, we're a museum. But they had 40 pieces. And so we invited curators from San Francisco, Oakland, around the Bay to come and objectively look at the art. And out of that, we saved 15 pieces. So there was like literally.
We still have them. I just want to say.
So
We
you can
played.
imagine how much space and how much maintenance that would have taken up. And then we met with the curators, and we were taken by what the curators were interested in was, again, not just the building itself, but the city. They were interested in actually curating things in the city. And looking around the lake, we then start to populate a lot of these through this concept. And in each one of these, we had small focus groups that allowed us to make what I think really, really major decisions about what the design would be. Our partners were Arup, Tom McCaig, Tom does biomimicry, and the staff. The staff literally became working partners. They came to the studio, we did community walks, we went out and we tried to figure out how to get people to think about the city as well as think about the museum. And this is us taking a walk and talking to the curators. I think no one had walked from the museum to down to City Hall and back. We were out for 2 hours and we were interested the whole time, which meant that we could literally create these loops around the city that led back to the museum because they have a parking lot. And people could actually park your car and you can actually go out and experience the city. We came up with a whole set of metrics for that, that then led to some of the fundraising, but getting people excited. Now, getting to the building, once we did that, it was easy then to do the various things, site curation, gardens, and breaking the box. Arup showed us where we could actually break out of this box. And we then looked at that. This is an early, when the project first opened, you can kind of see the vegetation hadn't grown. And as we were working, we began to understand that we needed to remove most of the planting because this wouldn't be the first time the planting was removed. When they first built the museum, late 60s, early 70s, UC Berkeley landscape architects, they grew dirt at the BART parking lot because no one was doing roofs, and the dirt was so good, the trees grew really fast and climaxed out. So we're in like the third set of plants around. And so our concept was fairly easy for the planting, that it just should reinforce the architecture. And then we tried to sort of create this layer so people wouldn't get lost. So as you move from level to layer, you actually are in a different biome of the California landscape.
Can I just add one thing there of note? We are the Museum of California. We focus on California art, history, and natural sciences. Almost none of the planting before this were California natives.
Yeah.
So that was also part of the curatorial goal, and the interpretive goal was actually how does the museum experience extend beyond our galleries into the garden itself?
And the one non-native that we saved was the Mediterranean layer, which is up at the top, and those are olive trees. But again, thinking about when the museum was done in the 60s and 70s, it was a cultural landscape. So people were actually planting rosemary, those kinds of stuff that was culturally acceptable at the this is a plan view overhead. This is us opening up. You can actually see where we've actually cut the removal of the plants all the way around. But this is the main opening on this side. And then there's another opening on the other side that Mark Cavanaro did the restaurant. We did a ramp that takes you there. So now the restaurant can be open by itself without the museum opening. If you've ever been to the museum, this is the first time that people actually come in from the lakeside and they go, where do I pay? And it's like, it's free. It's funny that perception from the other side, when you come in, you're looking for the ticket booth, but when you come in from the garden, it's a completely different feeling. And then this is taking that first Friday and really amping it up and using the terraces the way they should be used.
So we also, as you'll see here, with Friday nights, we had no infrastructure in the garden really for doing programming. We had very little lighting. We had, every week we were taking out AV and a stage and all of that. So that was also something to really make the gardens be a space that we could program actively.
And as you can see with these images, the seeding and the small vegetation, it actually feels more verdant than it did when it had the other, what I call the gray plants, right? The gray and green plants.
Shrubs, I call them.
And then that moment where you can actually see all the way in from the lake coming back through and really creating this new front porch.
Yeah, I should say the other thing that really shifted during the time from when I started in 2006, and the focus was kind of turning, I kind of think of it as almost turning our back on the lake, was all the work around Lake Merritt. So there had been a whole project to, to rehabilitate Lake Merritt. And it's so actively used now with people walking the lake and activities. There's an amphitheater across the street from us at Lake Merritt. And so this now is truly, the idea of it is to throw out the welcome mat and encourage people to come across from the lake directly into the museum. And so these openings, there are gates, but whenever the museum is open to the public, these gates are open and people can come and enjoy the gardens for free, as Walter said.
And the irony of all of this, if you think of brutalism in history, brutalism was about community. When you kind of think about it, there was a nice article in the Times this summer talking about the buildings that still exist in Brazil and how they still foster community. We actually get back to the goal of the early project, that it was a free museum you could enter from all sides. And so literally by cutting it, we actually accomplished the goal that they had from the beginning, which was you could enter from all sides, but then there was a trial going on next door, Huey. And so they had to close all the sides up. So in Kygan's actually original design, we actually saw that this was actually open and it was a bosque of trees.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Equal points, like for both teams. Thank you. Like no one is winning. No, amazing. The work is astounding. I think there's a lot of connections to these projects that are super interesting. I want to try to explore some of those. But I do, I heard you talk about day one for school. So maybe we start at the very beginning about, there was a master plan, there was things, projects afoot. Money, you're always thinking about where the money is going and how it's driving what you're doing for the museum, and a different story, a competition, really a search for ideas for them to support what their vision, could, or, to foster what their vision could be for the project. So maybe talk a little bit about, if you can think back to the, a few days ago about the competition, like how did you, think of selecting the team, and, what were sort of the criteria that drivers that like helped you shape why, and then you can, sort of spin off from for the master plan. That'd be great.
Gosh, our competition was actually pretty short and selective, and we just really chose a few firms. And one was sort of firms with very high design, because that appealed to the Kapors' experience in sort of a history of social justice, which Anne talked about. All the firms, the same thing. They all had community center work, affordable housing. They had a number of sort of similar, and then adaptive reuse, and some type of community building. Anne sort of mentioned it, but this building was a very difficult building. It's a small building, the shape of it, and then it had been altered significantly and then just sort of left. So we needed someone with the skill to come in and sort of see that. So those were.
And the community, the planning department was super interested too, because, it was historic. And so there were just a lot of limitations to what they would or wouldn't let us do. So we had a lot of meetings.
Yeah, we did not do a competition.
Yeah.
No, I should mention with this too, the building is owned by the city of Oakland. Our collection is owned by the city. So we did have to kind of jump through some hoops, because traditionally in a city building, there would be a kind of public bidding process. And we were able to make the case just because, as I said, Walter and I had been talking about this for a long time, and it wasn't, as you saw from the master plan, it wasn't like we had an RFP that we wanted to come in and can you just convert these plants to native plants? We were trying to think about, like, what is the place of the museum in the community, and what does it mean? We use the brand now a lot. Our kind of tagline is a museum, a garden, and a gathering place. What does it mean to be more than a museum in this community in Oakland? And all of the work to think not only about our space, but what's our relationship to, to all of the neighborhood around us. So there really was only one person who could do that. I just think Walter had taught about the museum for years to your classes, the kind of community work, the sort of understanding of history, the understanding of place, uniquely lives and works in Oakland. So we just went, we just said, we didn't know what we were doing, as you saw at the beginning with the master plan, but we brought Walter in early. And then because Mark Cavagnero and Associates had done renovation work with the museum over many years, kind of partnered for the building side of this.
And I think the other part, the big difference is having worked with other museums is you have a board.
Yeah.
Right. And so funding, presenting to the board and trying to inspire them for giving is a big part of museum work. Every museum we worked on, it's either been 3 individuals or like 20 individuals that you really have to sell the project through. And I thought that was a lot. We presented a lot.
Yeah.
In the beginning, just kind of vetting and getting people excited about making the change. And I think change is really hard to a place that's so lived in,
Yeah.
particularly like the museums.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So as these projects sort of evolved and you stepped into working together as teams, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of idea discovery, because there's discovery about how to work together. There's discovery, you touched on a number of things about sort of the aspects of these existing buildings and facilities and their relationship to their place and the limitations and technical challenges of intervening into something new, into these historic sort of buildings. So it'd be great to hear about some of the things that you've discovered and feel that you can answer in heroic ways about how you solved all the problems. We want to hear that, but like talk about, and also working together, like what, the conversations that you discovered were the ones that really, lifted the project or lifted your, the capability of your teams to design these projects.
No, we talked about it.
We've known each other for so many years, and I can't remember like if we worked. And so working together was actually like seamless.
Yeah.
It was really,
Yeah, no, it was great.
it was really easy. I think that one of the challenges was having, so our, this was we're building an institution, but we were also dealing with a husband and wife team, and it was like a private home, and like, Mitch had one idea, Frida had another idea, we worked with Mitch for a long time. Frida wasn't really interested in the project. And then when we were in construction, she became interested, and we redesigned the project during construction from closed offices to open offices, because she liked open offices and he liked closed offices. So it was really challenging. It was, and trying to keep it on schedule, and then, trying to manage a budget and things like that. So, so
It was. I mean, I think Michael and I kind of had each other's backs, which is great because there was a lot of other stuff going on around. I mean, the building was a mess. It was lovely from the outside and terrible on the inside. And so for us, remodels are always about like, what's the best part of the building and how can you highlight that and how can you get rid of the worst? And we tried to do the best we could, but there were like ceiling floors, like the third floor is like, no, the second floor is like, 8-foot ceilings barely. So try getting ducts in there and doing whatever. And so, I mean, there was just every single floor had to sort of be considered separately and kind of been sort of put back together again to fit with the other ones. So that was the thing. And I think, the patience level was very high though, I think for us, because we love the idea of doing this building. It was like exactly the kind of work that we like to do. But also I think Michael really understood the challenges and the whole team did and kind of worked together to make that happen. Frida did occasionally throw a few curveballs, like redesigning the whole third floor, like when it's under construction, you're like, okay, that was not easy. So, but this is part of what the process is, right? I mean, you have a client and it could be an institution, or it could be two people who are in an institution or becoming an institution, whatever it is, you have to figure out a way to understand where they're coming from. And I think part of it is that it was the first time they're going to have their everything that they worked on in one place. And all of a sudden, like they were changing what they worked on, right? So it was constantly evolving. And I think that was part of it too. So the open office space was all of a sudden becoming something that they thought, well, maybe that works better with our model of what we're trying to do here. So, you had to sort of be a part of that and say, okay.
I think that's a really interesting connection, because Laurie was talking about the museum gathering these museums together in one place, and Mitch and Frida gathering these, these social justice folks together in one place to create that sort of catalyst and energy. Sort of interesting that they, that
And they
alignment.
really wanted the building to be open to the whole community, right? So the big idea was that the building seemed as open and as permeable as possible, as opposed to sort of this closed off, kind of just, it's an office building, and to get in, you need to sort of swipe your card.
Yeah.
And even if you go to Mitch and Frida's home, because we have to do that, they live in Heald, they live in Healdsburg. Walter, did you go to their house? No, okay.
You didn't invite me.
They live in Healdsburg. And they have this, I can't remember, but they have this compound where they have this house, but then they bought all their neighbors' houses too. So they must have 5 or 6 houses all on huge plots of land. And it's just like, and when the day we went, there were all these people, and it's all about gathering and about ideas. And so it's just like there's their house, but then there's the other house, and these people are there, and these people from New Zealand are there, and these people, and and it's just, and that's the way they operate. So in this building, there was their nonprofits, Level Playing Field was in the building, their investment company was in the building, their foundation was in the building. And plus there was gathering space for nonprofits to be able to come in. So it's really amazing how they how they are as people and how open their lives are. I mean, most of us don't have people just coming into our homes and and that's kind of the way they are. And they're fascinating. They're really fascinating.
And when the building opened, I think Frida, she had people like Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, every single big tech person was coming by to talk about this issue, because at the time it was sort of becoming something that everybody was concerned about. So it was really interesting to see how that. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, there was a lot of discovery. No, I mean, I think it's interesting, because I think we were trying to think about a whole different, when you said reimagining a place that people have lived in and worked on and think they know. And that was a big part of it. I mean, we had a lot of people involved with this, because there were so many elements of it. There was the curatorial element of the placing of the sculpture, which had a huge element of where a sculpture was going to be placed, and working with the curators and collection staff. And there was the whole programming element, the stage. So, and I think it's really important to note that it was a vision that we had to raise money for it. We did not have the self-funding mechanism. So there was this constant sharing of the vision. I mean, Walter was amazing in talking with our board and talking with funders. And then we did have the city of Oakland and the Landmark Preservation Board. So it was, and we had a lot of different iterations, because we had to figure out what we could actually not just afford, but sustain and support with a very lean operation that takes care of this building. So.
Yeah, and I think our big discovery was, how did they get those trees to grow that much dirt? When we removed the dirt from the planters, it blew our minds what these things were trying to grow. And because we had a planting plan that was based on not actually having done the field work. So we had this idea of having big trees along the walkways coming down, because there are planters, there must be dirt. We moved that out, there was that much dirt. And so that was blew our minds, because we had to really reconceptualize how we were thinking about it. And then going through construction, of course, there was all of these issues, associated with seeding versus planting. But the big thing was, it was one of the first roof gardens in the country, because we have Kaiser right next to it. Kaiser got it right. They put the trees on the structure. So those big oak trees are over a column. At the Oakland Museum, it's just this copper thing, and trees were trying to grow everywhere. So that was a big thing.
Yeah, the actual growing conditions in the space itself.
And then Mark discovered that there was a module in the building that repeated all the way through, and that became where we cut. So that was another discovery that Mark did a big deep dive into. So.
Cool. Yeah. I think a couple of things that resonated with me are that creating this rooftop space that is, this really great accessible space for everybody, in downtown Oakland, and then recreating this new, accessible space to the community that even though they these projects serve sort of different communities and different functions. I think it's really interesting that the design drivers though just are pushing that notion of getting that space to be accessible to as many people and available to as many people as you can. I think that's really interesting. Maybe you can talk about if how that has influenced or sort of changed how the museum operates. I know you touched on it a little bit, but and then, reflect a little bit, like how people are gathering maybe or experiencing that space for Kapor.
I mean, I can say it was a game changer for us. And I will tell you, we were really happy after 15 months of closure during COVID. We started this project, the construction in February 2020. And then, we were almost going to open in November of 2020. We were getting close. We had announced it, and then the state shut down again. And then other museums in the Bay Area were starting to open in the spring, and we were so close to this project being done. We waited until we could open with the gardens complete in June of 2021. And we were really happy to have extensive outdoor space as a museum during that time. But as I said, now, we've stopped kind of thinking, a lot of museums, it's like, we're very fixated on visitation, and we think about how many visitors are ticketed versus unticketed and free versus paid. And we've just stopped thinking about that. Like, we see this space as much a part of the experience of the museum as coming into the galleries, and it's utilized extensively. I mean, we do a lot of events in this space. I mean, every Friday night between now, we used to do it year round. This was another thing. 2013, we did Friday nights at the museum. In 2013, there was not one Friday night with rain. Is that wild? And then the last couple of years, so we've shifted now, and we do Thursday night indoor programming now in the winter, and do Friday nights between, March and October. Still a nice long season. School groups use it like crazy. So it's really changed. And I think we're starting to now see, not as much as we wanted to at first, but starting to see people really just kind of wander over. We'll see what happens when Kaiser Convention Center, which is right across from us, actually gets utilized and starts being more active. We think that'll be another big pivot for us.
No, I think the building, if you've been there, it's counterintuitive, like from an accessible point of view. So when you come in the lower part, you think if you stay in the gauntlet, you'll get up, but then you'll run into stairs. So of course there was no ramps back then.
Oh yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is beautiful is that everyone now meets at the same level through ramps, and that's where the ticketing and the restaurant is. And so we figured it out. Well, Mark on Oak Street put the ramp in the planters, so you don't see a ramp, and we were able to do the same thing on the lower part. So you don't really read the plant, you don't read the ramps, you actually still read the landscape, and people have a very close connection.
Cool.
So I think for us, the building, was so, it's like it's in its own landscape, right? And it's like a canyon, and it's surrounded by much taller buildings, but because of the way it's geographically located, it has windows on all three sides, and that's kind of like somewhat circular banding. So for us, it was really about that. It was about this idea of this building that's almost like a landscape itself. And that's why we wanted the top floor to be this kind of odd circular thing with this crazy landscape, that by some crazy landscape architect. Okay. Anyway, so, and that was really important because we felt like anybody working up and down the street can see it, right? Like that's a way to introduce this whole organization to Oakland in general, is this ability for it to sort of be seen, even if you're not going to go up there unless necessarily you got to, have lunch there or something. So that was a big part of it. And we just, love the fact that like Gensler could look down on the project. And they could go,
Oh, wow. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Art. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that was a big part of how we thought about it, just
Cool. Well, just to add to your project, the other great thing I think about Kapor Center is the ground floor.
Right.
That there's a restaurant, a sidewalk.
Right.
They really asked us to kind of bring
That's true.
all of that
All that
down to the ground. So we actually have circles in the sidewalk.
Right.
Right. So
Exactly.
I really love that there was an attention not only inside, but also to the ground.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that with the restaurant too, because this was another huge change, is that we have a wonderful restaurant. Highly
Yeah.
recommend Town Fair.
Yes.
It does now have an entry, and the 10th Street, directly from the street, you can come into the restaurant without going through the museum. And one of Mark's great ideas was the window
Yeah.
on 10th, so it completely broke the box on that side of the museum as well. And so those are gathering places too, right? Really critical to the function of bringing people together.
And Black Brunch on Sunday is awesome. I probably got the name wrong. It's probably African American brunch.
I didn't think they call it Sunday brunch.
Yeah, but I went there and they were just saying, this is black brunch. And it was like, they were playing soul music. You can get chicken and waffles, and it's all my people in there. So I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
It's a
Yep.
great place.
Yeah. Featured
Cool.
on Check Please recently.
Check, please. Oh my goodness. And I appreciate that, like, people looking down and being a little bit jealous that they don't have what you've designed there. That's pretty sweet. I said it. I appreciate it. Yeah. I just have one last little topic, and then we can open it up to conversation with everybody. But I did want to, sort of this moment of, it's been a really positive discussion and happiness about these projects and the joy that we see them bringing, to Oakland. And I think, in under the pressure of dealing with planning, the pressure, the ideas of planning and, the historic, weight of what an Oakland Museum had to uncover, from being walled off and also inheriting this pretty spectacular piece of brutalist experience that is sort of unreal a little bit in the middle of Oakland. Like under those sort of pressures, like how do you, how do you stay focused and keep your team and everybody happy and pleased and, feel like you can, I know Walter's like, yeah, not every day, but what are the, I really want, I think it's so important to have that as part of projects because ugly architecture will result, if it doesn't exist. So how do we, any thoughts about that?
I think it's hard, like frankly, these buildings are complicated. I mean, yours is even that much more complicated, but our little building that's like 40,000 square feet or whatever it is, and this packed, it's difficult, right? But I think for us, we were committed to Michael and to his vision of what the building should be and could be with Mitch and Frida, and we just wanted to stay true to that. So we just kind of stuck that line pretty strongly and didn't let too many things kind of deviate from that. And it was easy because, oh yeah, remove that, don't do this. Okay, that was bad. We can't do that. And then at the end, you've got nothing but like this hodgepodge. So, you have to stick true and I think you have to believe in what you're doing enough to do that. And I think we really did believe in their kind of mission and what they were trying to do. So, but it takes a lot of negotiation. So I know you had a bigger board, but believe me, we're sitting across.
I bet.
Yeah. So.
I think the thing that kept us focused that it was a restoration scheme, or it wasn't like trying to start over. There was something of value that we knew we had. And so just thinking about kind of flora, but not thinking about doing too many swing things, but really trying to bring out what's there. And that's the hard part, I find, working with projects, because you do want to do something more. At least I always do, but then you have to understand the context of your projects. Because even as a city project, knowing that this project doesn't have the funding of a $200 million DeYoung Museum,
Right.
And to understand that when you're working on that kind of thing, you have to sort of understand they're just different. They're the same kinds of institutions, but there's just different investments. And I just think Lori kind of cleared a nice space to kind of be creative without going overboard to a certain degree. So she let me indulge. She indulged me.
No, it was, I will say the fundraising for this project was part of a much larger fundraising campaign to actually raise endowment and investment support. We did separate from the city of Oakland as we were a city department. I used to report to the city administrator, and half of our staff were city employees until 2011. So our city funding has declined significantly, and we had to raise money for endowment and investment funds and operating support as well as capital. But it was interesting because even though this was not the largest part of our campaign, it became symbolic of what we were trying to do. This became the visual for people to say, what does it mean for a museum to truly be part of its community? What does it mean? Since 1969, when we opened, we've been known as the Museum of the People. What does it really mean to open up and say, come on in, neighbors, this is your space too? And I think that was so ingrained as part of what this project was, that even though, I mean, especially when we were talking to the Landmark Preservation Board, we said, these are very limited, very contained, incisions here in the building. We really said these were strategic moves. This wasn't a big new wing. It wasn't, a grand gesture. It was, as you said, it was more of a, now I'm bringing it full circle, because when we met, the first project on the exhibition was called Revelatory Landscape.
Yeah.
So it was really revealing a landscape more than creating one. So, but it just became kind of what the museum is trying to do in this moment, in this community.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Should we hand it off to other folks who have questions? I guess online or in the room?
Oh, only in the.
Got you. Sorry. I broke protocol. I apologize. Yeah. The big door prize is, yeah.
I'd like to thank Walter and Lori for identifying where this project is and who the structural engineer was. But I'd like to ask you folks, where is this place? I heard Oakland a couple of times, but I have no idea where it is. And who is the structural engineer?
Wait, second.
It's in Oakland.
Second, right up for Brand.
Structural engineer. Wow. That's a really good question. Sorry, this is old age. I just forgot. I've just sort of forgotten. Yeah, I can't remember. Was it?
That makes sense.
I think it might have been them, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think it was a.
Murphy Curry, maybe? Was it Murphy Curry?
It might have been. I have to look it up. Sorry, it was somebody different. No, we've worked with them before, but we have to get somebody that could work with these pre-existing conditions, and it was complicated because shear walls have been poured and the pit for the elevators was already in, so we had to reuse it, even though maybe the elevator should have been somewhere else, and there was this bracing, and so it was really, they also had to do this huge forensic and kind of look at everything that was done and figure out what they could or couldn't reuse. I'll look it up. It's on our website, I'm sure. So.
Other questions?
This is for the OMCA team. So you spoke about selling this idea to the city. I'm just curious on what were some of your metrics to sell or pitch the idea? Because like you said, it wasn't an RFP. It was something you guys have been talking about. And sometimes as architects, we put in so much effort into that, that money shot, that visual that we want to sell to the city to say, hey, this is what we're proposing. So for a project like this, of this scale, where there's a lot of mapping and kind of, involving the community in reaching that vision, how do you sell that kind of idea to a city? Oh, was there anything that you felt was powerful in, making your statement felt?
Few things. I mean, one, I would say first of all, well, Walter Hood. I mean, such great respect within the city, but I think that there were a couple things I would say. One is that both Walter and Mark Caballero have great respect and understanding of what this building is and what its history is. And really understanding Kevin Roach's vision, and Mark understands that deeply, and Walter with Dan Kiley. I think there was an understanding within the kind of historic preservation folks within the city that there was going to be a real honoring of that legacy. We also made a real effort to talk, there are some real active neighbors around Lake Merritt, and, there were folks who were very involved with Measure DD, the Lake Merritt project. We really reached out to them. Remember when you brought in the guy that has done the historian that had done all the work around brutalist landscapes, and he did that white paper? Do you remember that
Yes,
guy?
I remember, but I can't think of the name.
But there was also, an understanding that there are a lot of brutalist landscapes that were being altered and actually erased across the country. And so Walter made a real effort to kind of engage with what we were trying to do. And the other thing that was really interesting is from the mayor the mayor at that time was Libby Schaaf. she was really interested in this neighborhood. She was really interested in the whole idea of kind of, she actually is kind of an urban planning geek, you know?
She had a mayor's institute.
Yeah, she went to the Mayor's Institute. So I think that there was a real understanding of what we were trying to do, the role we were trying to play in the city and the neighborhood. And then we just had brilliance being able to articulate and present the idea. You know, I would often say we're no longer a city museum, but we're a civic museum. My other favorite line with Libby Schaaf was, we want to be as indispensable to Oakland as the A's, the Raiders, and the Warriors, and we're staying. So, that didn't really go over that well. But it's true. We wanted to be a civic anchor.
And you use that image in every meeting, which was pretty compelling because we were winning championship. We're going to be ready for the next one, you know, and the next one and the next one, which was awesome. But I also thought the Friday nights thing was
That's
a
true.
huge game changer because it was taking place outside the walls. And they were seeing that every Friday night, food trucks, they were packing it in. And it's like, well, why?
And Oakland needed it.
Yeah, and why isn't this happening inside? And it couldn't happen inside. And so I thought that was a big driver as well as people being able to envision the transformation.
Yeah, that's very true.
Thank you. Hi, Laurie and Walter. This is my favorite place in Oakland, and thank you for the presentation. I've been there multiple times, and I'm wondering, as a landscape architect, your project has such impact in terms of really long span of time since you started working on it. Even now you finished it, I think your vision still is evolving around it. And how often do you go back and to check your plants if they're growing, and what if they're not? And as a client, do you go back to him and asking, what do we do? And where do I?
So if you came right now, you'd see that we need some help.
I know.
First of all, I will say it's a huge amount of space.
Mhm.
And we called it phase one, and we prioritized the gardens within the museum. We did not do the whole perimeter around the museum. And what was great though about the planting scheme was that, you know, conceptually we worked with Walter's scheme about the different ecosystems. And then we did work with, we had a problem with our landscape contractor, which was nothing to do with that came through the contractor. But then we discovered, what are they called? The nursery, East Bay Wilds?
East Bay Wilds.
East Bay Wilds. You've got to actually figure out what plants are going to live, and not just in the East Bay and not just in Oakland. Between this side of the garden and that side of the garden, it was different planting conditions, different soils, different water, different, and you know, old irrigation system. So it's a long way of saying, we have only 2 gardeners on staff. And we work with now, you know, East Bay Wilds to figure out how to keep the vision and maintain the overarching ideas of hood design, but make it work for the limited resources that we have. So it's a work in progress and it's not done. But the interior part is, and I will tell you the other thing that we learned. I thought about this going up to Bodega Bay this weekend. Native plants look different during the course of the year in California. I mean, we have green seasons and we have yellow seasons, right? So that was another thing. Even early on, you said, you know, it's not going to look like that green shrub all year round. And our visitors have had to get used to that too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, and particularly now that climate, it's actually getting hotter.
Yeah.
Here, and the museum has a very interesting microclimate because of the tree. And you can actually see, like in some of the areas where we planted ferns, there's lots of reflection from the concrete, so the ferns don't like the heat. So again, in a lot of projects, particularly in big landscapes like this, it's a hard thing to understand that when you plant in mass like that, you're probably going to lose like 20 to 30% of some plants. I'll give you an example at the De Young in the big thing in the middle. We put in 5 kinds of ferns, only 1 lived. And the baby tiers actually like it better than anything else, which I would have never guessed. So again, it's like landscapes require that kind of maintenance. and going through. And so it is, as you said, it's a work. It's a work which I actually appreciate now versus the one and done thing.
Yeah.
That you live with the landscape and you actually modify and make it. And particularly now as climate's changing, we're going to have more modification. Like a lot of our projects on the East Coast now, we're having to put canopies in. And these were lots of trees. We're still having to deal with shade issues. So, hope that answers.
Teach me that it's up with them.
That's when you know you got.
Our security guard.
Yeah.
I love the museum. And if you ever come into the galleries and see Misty, she'll give you quite an introduction to any of the major exhibitions. So.
May I? I wanted to tell a little story about the Oakland Museum and what it meant to me. I was going through school, architecture school at Pratt Institute in the early mid-60s. And coming from my background, I felt like I was entering the wrong field. I was discovering this is a rich man's field. You serve the rich. It's the history of the rich and wealthy throughout time. This is not for me. And I think it was in 64 that the museum was finished. 69, but it was first published. Images of it was first published around 64. I was a junior. I saw that thing and it just blew me away. I said, what kind of institution would give the land back to the city, back to the people? What is going, this is the 60s thinking at the time. And I was coming from that. And I said, and from Brooklyn, and I said, I never used the word brutalist with that building when I saw it. My God, this is so soft and fuzzy and friendly. The brutalism would be the last word I would use for it. 10 years later, when I moved out here, the first thing I did was, I got to see this place to believe what was done here. First, I didn't know who was running the institution at the time to think that that's the right thing to do. Because in New York, you're growing up in New York, museums are haughty places, they're distant. Again, they serve the wealthy, and the wealthy store their art there to improve the value of their art. I mean, I had terrible visions of what museums were about. I wanted to find out what made this place tick, and Roche did what he was able to do there. So I was really excited when I went to see the place. This was in 77. I was not disappointed, but two things did disappoint me.
This was well before my time, so I know.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
these are all the,
you have to carry the.
these are the, one was on the lakeside,
Yeah.
which really wasn't a lakeside. You got to remember that up at that period of time when it was done, there was like an 8-lane on-grade highway
Yeah.
that cut off the lake and
Yeah.
rammed through there. It was a horrible thing. And it was a group of us actually who brought around Measure DD
Yeah.
and did the plan for redoing that whole edge of the lake so that it would be more of a people place. But when I first saw it, I saw that wall out there. I didn't think of brutalism, but I said, this is not what I thought it was going to be on this side. And then when I was in the gardens, I love the gardens. You know, you come from New York, there was no tree on my block in Brooklyn. So I saw these lush gardens and it didn't occur to me, maybe these species aren't even from California. But when I approached the lake side, the width of the planters was so deep, I couldn't see the lake. You can't tell that the lake is there,
No.
especially when the plants are in place. You look, you try to get, you can't see the lake. Now, I haven't been back since the opening of it, of the new version of it. So I'm going to go back and see if I can see the lake from the upper platforms. But the opening from the street level, the first thought that occurred to me, being now a resident of Oakland for over 40 years, how are they staffing that entrance? Is there a person there? Is it controlled in any way? Can people really stroll right in to the grounds?
Yeah.
I was to the grounds many times for the Girls Inc. Girls Inc. always had their annual fundraiser there. So my wife and I would go there because we would love to sample all the foods. So I was familiar with the layout up there. But I worried about anybody can stroll in and there's no one there to screen them. Is that what's going on?
No, we have a security guard there.
You do.
Yeah, I mean, they.
Okay, now I'm
say that
disappointed.
They're very low key
Yeah.
and there's no ticketing and there's very welcoming signage and knock on wood. I mean, we've had little things, but we haven't had anything major.
Well, I mean, to summarize my long rant here, that building kept me in this profession.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, come back. Let us know when you're back. We'll walk, because the other thing is just the view from that corner out to the lake changes it. But the other thing that's crazy that I didn't fully, I'm not an architect, so I didn't grok this before, but going in that entry, you see the museum in a whole different way that you never, yeah, you never saw the elevation, the way it was designed, because you just didn't have that orientation. You were always coming at with your back to it, really.
And there was gold painting.
Well, there was gold pattern.
You're probably paying gold.
Yeah, there was a weird little Western village back there for a while.
Yeah.
We actually tried to make Walter figure out another place for us to pan gold, but we gave that up.
Geyser Center might be good for that.
I really enjoyed tonight. Thank you guys all for being here. I believe a successful project really happens when the designer and the owner or the owner's representative really have some kind of connection. And it looks like both of these teams, your teams do. You had a personal relationship, a friendship prior to working together on these two projects. How did that inform your relationship? Did it strengthen that bond and friendship? And can you see in a project that you work on when you don't have that relationship, what are the difficulties and pitfalls?
Yes, it does. It helps relationship. And then Michael actually hired me to do another project recently. And that was another interesting one.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Did you really? I
Yeah,
thought-
yeah,
It's really
put that out.
fans.
That was barely finished.
That project was kind of magical. That little project that we just did.
It was, but
Yeah.
you don't remember how. Okay.
Yeah, no,
whatever.
no,
He's
no, the-
selective,
yeah, it
but he did.
it wasn't easy, but
Yeah.
it was a really
I
nice.
think for us, we just got to know each other better, frankly, because before it was more of a sort of social relationship with other people and stuff like that, but we did, because we spent a lot of time. And then, and then it was great. Michael brought us back in to do this actually lobby remodel of the HUD housing project that's in the Fillmore. So the whole ground floor, which is really important because it hasn't been done in, I don't know, 70 years or something like that. It was pretty bad.
It hadn't been redone and it didn't exist.
Yeah,
They had a
exist,
hallway
yeah,
and so the seniors, the only thing they had was a hallway.
Mhm.
And it's been magical. And they make me come back every other Friday for gospel night.
Do they?
Yes,
They haven't
they have a
called me yet. I
gospel
guess I'm gonna
piano player
Yeah.
and all the seniors, and they come down and they sing. And they text me every Friday that, 3:30, make sure you come. And so I have to go and sing gospel with all these seniors. And it's just, it's so fantastic. There's, the African Americans, Asian, Russian. I mean, there's just all these people and they just sing gospel. It's really delightful.
I mean, the thing that matters, I guess, sometimes you have, a larger budget or just, it's a different thing, but this housing thing was amazing because everybody was just so happy to have this new space, right? I mean, the space is nice, but it's not nice. It's very nice, but it's not revolutionary, but my God, the difference it makes in their lives.
Mhm.
And that's what you realize that, this is where really all that time is so well worth it, because they just, it's transformative for them. And that's really what matters.
I mean, I will just say, I never really thought of myself as the client. Sorry, Walter, probably I should have, right? No, I think we both wanted to do something really good for Oakland. I remember Walter, we actually, for the first few years before we kind of went public with our capital campaign, I called it the Dream Big campaign, because Walter said to me at one point, I've worked and lived in Oakland for 25 years, and I'm so sick of this city always settling, always it's good enough, and we'll get by. And for once, I want to think about doing something where we dream big. And I think that was kind of and I just learned so much. I mean, I really, the whole planning process, the master planning process was such a conceptual exercise that for me, it was just such a gift I was just on this learning journey, and I think everybody on our staff was on our board. I mean, we don't have We don't have the Dion. We don't have that kind of wealth. We have people who were super civic minded, and that's what they were excited about.
And you were a great client.
I mean, now I want to go do it. I see the other museums that you work on, and I'm like, I want to start from scratch with a ton of money. And really do something.
No, but it's like, I mean, that's the nice thing that I think about museum work is normally, particularly in landscape architecture, you are talking to the client. And a lot of landscape projects, we're actually answering things through the architect or through some other means. And for me, creatively, that I'm not always given the right information. Right. And it's happened working with certain architects, they like throw bombs at you. They tell you one thing and you're gonna like die. And so it's really nice to like have a client and having that direct connection, even though you have a huge team that I can pick up the phone and call you and vice versa, which makes the work worth it to a certain degree. I mean, you feel like you can invest, right? Because there's a connection. So
I will say that was a complication, which is, it was really Walter's vision. But Mark Caballero had done the previous renovation project, but there were building elements. So we had two contracts. Not Walter's contract was not whatever. You weren't a sub to Caballero and Associates or the reverse, which had some complications because it was like, okay, wait a minute, is that stage landscape or building? And the answer was absolutely.
Yeah. I love that one meeting. So the halo thing.
No, are you like you're the vertical guy and you're the horizontal guy? I don't know.
But we all love each other.
True. Yeah.
I really like that question at the end, unless someone else has something else to step it up. All right, chat, what do you got?
Okay.
In being forward thinking, this goes to both teams. In being forward thinking, how did you think about flexibility, change, or perhaps things we can't even anticipate today?
No, we're inclined to change the program while we're. That's ultimate flexibility. So we can go back to making it closed offices super easy. I got the drawing, it's all done. And so, I mean, yes, you think about hopefully an institution that can do stuff in that building and change it over time. But it's, as I said, it's a tight space for everything that they need to do. So we were more concerned about just sort of fitting in really into the program that we had and hoping that they liked it enough that they could make a home out of it. And I always love it because when I go on the website, there's always pictures of them in the building. It's always in the building. Like, it's not just like some, backdrop or something. They're sitting on some chair. They're in the middle of the kind of ground stairs and stuff. So I think it means to me that the building has become kind of an integral part of how they see themselves. So that's what matters.
It's really their legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really their like legacy. And, I worked on the California Endowment building in LA, and I remember talking to Bob Ross, the CEO who just retired, that, about, yes, the endowments are legacy, but this building that you're creating is really going to be your legacy. And the building's still going to be there with the person. The thing that I find interesting now with climate change is that there's so many projects that I've worked on in the last 10 years that are so different because of the way the climate's changed. And so for this one, the Kapor Center, we had passive air, the meeting rooms are conditioned, but the open areas and my understanding is they actually had to go back and they sort of they had to add air conditioning to the building, and so that's just just in these last few years, but that's happened on a number of projects that I've worked on where they had to go back.
I mean, I would just speak more. The way I look at the Oakland Museum is the galleries that are highly controlled, and it's the landscape. Like, if you think of them as galleries and spaces that you guys use in just a myriad of ways.
Yeah, no, I really think of it as kind of the platform for what we do in the programming. And it has, we are continuing to learn from it. Like, oh, now we can do this over here. And we didn't used to have the Dia de los Muertos in that space, but now we can use it over here. So we continue to learn from it. And now we have to figure out how we don't make the galleries so static. I mean, it's, you know, it's hard when you're in perpetuity business, but yeah, thinking about it more as a platform than as a container, I guess.
And I guess it's almost a good thing that the landscape is phased, because
Yeah.
now as the landscape grows in, we can actually see what's making, what's not making.
Yeah.
So it's kind of good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I love this pairing of these two buildings, and I love the conversation. So our next event is September 19th. Yes, we'll be moderating that one. So hopefully he got some good insight on this presentation. So please come join us for that. And tell us what you think of this presentation and its event. People we met, speakers, say good things about them. Moderators, please give it all. And Scott, thank you so much for stepping up and have some good questions.
Thank you all. So glad to. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.